Move your car now, or we're towing it. This isn't your level. The sentence cracked through the quiet morning air like it had been rehearsed, loud enough for everyone in the VIP section to hear, loud enough to turn heads, and loud enough to draw a line Naomi Carter hadn't crossed, but was being accused of anyway. She stood beside her car, a clean, understated black sedan parked perfectly within the lines of a space marked VIP resident access only in bold white letters, the kind of sign that didn't just regulate parking but signaled status. Naomi didn't respond right away. She didn't flinch, didn't rush, didn't reach for her phone or her keys. She simply looked at the man who had just spoken to her like that. A security guard in a pressed uniform, mid-40s, arms folded with the kind of authority that only shows up when it feels safe to be wrong. Around them, the complex was waking up. Glass balconies caught the morning sun, reflecting light across polished concrete. A few residents walked by holding coffee cups, slowing just enough to watch without being obvious. And then came the second voice, sharper, laced with amusement. They always try this. A white woman muttered to her partner, just loud enough to be heard. Park where they don't belong and act confused when they get called out. A quiet laugh followed, thin and dismissive. Naomi heard it. Of course she did. She had heard versions of that sentence her entire life, dressed in different words, spoken in different rooms, but always carrying the same assumption. She didn't belong. Not here. Not like this. The security guard stepped closer, tapping a handheld device against his palm. License plates not in the VIP system, he said, his tone firm, final, like a verdict already decided. So I'm gonna need you to move it. Now. Still, Naomi didn't argue. She glanced briefly at the sign again, then back at him, her expression calm, almost curious, as if she were observing something rather than reacting to it. A tow truck engine rumbled faintly in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, the low mechanical growl cutting through the stillness. Someone nearby lifted their phone, pretending to check messages but angling the camera just enough to capture the scene. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, her heels clicking once against the pavement, a small sound that somehow carried more control than anything being said around her. "You're calling a tow truck?" she asked, her voice even, measured, not raised, not rushed. The guard didn't hesitate. Already did. He nodded toward the entrance as the truck turned the corner, bright yellow, impossible to ignore. VIP means something here. Naomi let the word settle. VIP means something here. She repeated it silently, not with frustration, but with recognition. Then she looked back at the building, at the glass, the steel, the symmetry of a place designed to signal exclusivity, and something behind her eyes shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Not anger, not surprise, something steadier, something that had been built over years of moments just like this. And when she finally spoke again, it wasn't louder, it wasn't sharper, but it carried weight that hadn't been there before. "You're right," she said quietly. "It does." The tow truck rolled closer, tires humming against the pavement, the driver already eyeing her car like a job halfway done, while the small crowd grew just enough to feel like an audience. And Naomi Carter, still standing exactly where she had been told she didn't belong, reached into her pocket, not in panic, not in defense, but with the calm precision of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. The tow truck came to a slow, deliberate stop just a few feet away, its engine idling like a countdown that no one had officially started but everyone could feel, and the driver leaned out of his window, scanning the scene with a practiced glance, already assuming he knew how this would go, already expecting compliance, because that was usually how these moments ended, with someone stepping aside, apologizing, moving their car, disappearing quietly, but Naomi Carter did none of those things. She remained exactly where she was, posture relaxed, eyes steady, as if the noise around her had nothing to do with her at all, and that calm began to ripple outward in a way the security guard did not expect, because confidence without explanation made people uneasy, especially when they were used to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am," he said again, a little sharper this time. "This is your last warning before we tow it." And there it was, the escalation, the attempt to force movement through pressure, through urgency, through the idea that time itself was running out. But Naomi did not move faster. She did not speak louder. She simply pulled her phone from her pocket with slow precision, not like someone reacting, but like someone following a sequence that had already been decided long before this moment began. And as she unlocked the screen, a notification lit up briefly, then disappeared, and her thumb hovered for just a second before she placed the call, holding the phone to her ear without turning away from the scene in front of her. "It is Naomi," she said, her voice low, controlled, and entirely free of strain. "I need you to confirm the status of property. 7 Charlie." There was a pause, not long, just enough for the tension in the air to stretch tighter, the kind of pause that made the security guard shift his weight and glance at the tow truck driver, who was now stepping out of the cab, preparing his equipment with casual efficiency, metal chains clinking softly against each other, the sound oddly loud in the silence that had settled over the small crowd. "Yes," Naomi continued, listening now, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "Execute the transfer immediately." She lowered the phone just enough for a breath, then added, "Full control, effective now," and ended the call without explanation, without announcement. Just a quiet conclusion to something no one else in that space understood. The white couple exchanged a look, their earlier amusement fading into something less certain, because there was a shift happening, subtle but undeniable, the kind that did not need to be explained to be felt, and the security guard frowned, his authority still intact on the surface, but beginning to crack underneath. "Who are you calling?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it, because uncertainty had replaced certainty, and Naomi finally turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes again. "Someone who makes decisions," she said, not as a threat, not as a boast, but as a simple statement of fact, and that was when it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet precision of something inevitable. The guard's handheld device buzzed in his hand, a sharp, unexpected vibration that made him glance down, his brow tightening as he read the notification, then reading it again, slower. This time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense, but they did not, and the color in his face shifted, just slightly, just enough for those watching to notice, and for the first time since he had spoken, he did not immediately know what to say. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, like the air had shifted direction and no one had quite caught up to it yet. And the security guard stared at the screen in his hand as if it had just betrayed him, his thumb hovering over the notification, unsure whether to scroll, dismiss it, or pretend it had never arrived at all. But the message remained, clear and unchanged, and for the first time since this moment began, his posture softened, just slightly, just enough to break the illusion of control he had been holding on to. "Is something wrong?" the tow truck driver asked from a few feet away, one hand resting on the metal hook, the other shielding his eyes from the glare of the morning sun, and the guard did not answer right away, because he was reading it again, slower now, more carefully, as if understanding required a second attempt, then a third. And the white couple who had laughed earlier leaned in closer without realizing it, their expressions shifting from amusement to curiosity, because uncertainty had replaced certainty, and it was impossible to ignore. Naomi watched all of it without moving, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged, as if she had already seen this moment unfold before it ever happened. And in a way, she had, because this was not new, not really. The setting was different, the faces were different, but the pattern was familiar, the assumption, the dismissal, the quiet confidence of people who believed they understood her place before she ever spoke a word. And for a brief second, something flickered behind her eyes, not anger, not even frustration, but memory. She was 26 again, standing in a leasing office in Chicago, dressed in a tailored suit she could barely afford at the time, holding a folder filled with financial statements that proved more than enough, and still being told, gently but firmly, that the property was no longer available, only to watch someone else walk in minutes later and be offered the same unit without question. She remembered the smile she held then, the one that hid everything she was thinking, the one that said she understood, even when she did not accept it. And she remembered what she did after that, how she built, how she learned, how she stopped asking for access and started owning the doors instead. And now, years later, standing in a parking space someone else thought she had no right to occupy, that same calm had returned, deeper now, sharper. "Earned, sir," the security guard finally said, his voice no longer as firm as before, directed not at Naomi but at the tow truck driver. "Just give me a second." And that alone was enough to shift the energy again, because a second ago there had been no hesitation, no pause, only instruction, only certainty, and now there was doubt, visible, undeniable, and the driver frowned slightly, glancing between the guard and Naomi, then back at the car, as if recalculating the situation in real time. "We towing it or not?" he asked, the question simple, but the answer suddenly not, and the guard exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the device as another notification buzzed through. This one longer, more detailed, and whatever it said, it landed harder than the first, because his shoulders dropped just a fraction, and he looked up at Naomi again. Really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at her car, but at her, as if trying to match what he was seeing in front of him with what he had just read, and failing to reconcile the two. "Ma'am," he started, then stopped, the word no longer carrying the same tone it had minutes ago, and Naomi tilted her head slightly, not impatient, not demanding, just waiting, the way someone waits when they already know what comes next, and around them, the quiet crowd leaned in just a little closer, because something had changed, something important, and even if they did not yet understand it, they could feel it unfolding in real time. The guard's voice did not come back the same way it had before. It came slower now, careful, like every word needed permission before it left his mouth. "There may have been an update," he said, and even he did not sound convinced by his own explanation, because whatever he was seeing on that screen was not something he had expected to deal with during a routine morning shift, and the tow truck driver straightened up fully now, stepping away from the equipment, his earlier confidence fading into hesitation as he looked between the guard and Naomi, sensing that this was no longer a simple call. "You want me to hold off?" he asked, and that question alone said everything, because a few minutes ago there had been no questions, only action, only assumption, and now there was uncertainty where certainty used to be, and the small crowd that had gathered began to murmur quietly, the energy shifting again, this time more visibly, as people started to piece together that something was not lining up the way it should. Naomi remained still, her phone now lowered at her side, her gaze steady, not on the guard's device, not on the tow truck, but on the guard himself, as if she were giving him the space to catch up to a reality he had not prepared for, and that patience, that absence of urgency, only made the moment heavier, because it removed any excuse for rushing past the truth. "What kind of update?" the white man from earlier asked, his tone no longer amused, now edged with curiosity that leaned dangerously close to concern, and his partner shifted beside him, arms crossing loosely as she watched, her earlier confidence replaced by a quiet calculation, trying to understand where this was going. The guard swallowed once, then glanced down again as another line of text populated on his screen, longer this time, more official, and whatever it confirmed made him straighten instinctively, like he had just been reminded of a rule far above his authority. "This vehicle," he started, then paused, recalibrating, "is registered under executive access." And the words hung there, incomplete, but already enough to ripple through the crowd, because executive access did not belong to visitors. It did not belong to people trying to sneak in. It belonged to people who made decisions, and Naomi's expression did not change, not even slightly, as if she had expected nothing less. "That does not make sense," the woman from earlier said quickly, almost too quickly, as if rejecting the statement could reverse it. "You just said it was not in the system," and the guard nodded once, slowly, acknowledging the contradiction without resolving it, because he could not yet, and the tow truck driver took another step back now, hands resting on his hips, fully disengaged from the task, waiting for clarity that had not arrived. "Sir," he said, more cautiously this time, "I am not hooking anything up until you confirm." And that was it. The momentum had stopped completely, the process interrupted not by argument, not by force, but by information, quiet, precise, and undeniable. Naomi took a single step forward then, not toward the car, not toward the truck, but toward the guard, closing just enough distance to bring the moment into sharper focus. And when she spoke, her voice remained calm, unchanged, but now it carried something else, something that settled deeper than anything said before. "You were right about one thing," she said. and the guard looked up immediately, drawn by the shift he could feel, but not yet name. VIP does mean something here, she continued, her eyes steady on his. You just did not know what it meant. And the words did not land like an attack. They landed like a correction, clean, precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And for a brief second, no one moved, no one spoke. Because the weight of what was unfolding had finally reached a point where it could not be ignored, and the only thing left was for the truth to catch up completely. The words settled into the space like a final piece clicking into place, and for a moment no one tried to interrupt them. Not the guard, not the couple, not even the tow truck driver who now stood completely still beside his vehicle, as if moving too soon might make things worse instead of better, and the guard cleared his throat once, a small sound that carried more tension than volume, his eyes dropping back to the screen in his hand, as if searching for something that could undo what he had just heard. But the information did not change, it only expanded, more lines appearing, more confirmation, more authority embedded in the system than he had access to question. Ma'am, he said again. But this time the word came out differently, stripped of its earlier edge, replaced with something closer to caution. There has been a system update regarding this property. And even that sounded insufficient, like he was trying to explain a situation he no longer controlled. The white couple exchanged another glance, their earlier certainty now gone entirely, replaced by a quiet discomfort that made them step back half a pace, as if distance might separate them from whatever this moment was becoming. Naomi did not step closer. She did not press him. She simply waited, her presence steady, giving the moment room to reveal itself fully, and that patience forced the guard to continue. The ownership status, he hesitated again, reading carefully now, has changed, and the words landed softly but carried weight far beyond their volume, because ownership was not a small detail. It was the foundation of everything happening here, and the tow truck driver let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly as he stepped back another foot, already disengaging from a job that no longer felt appropriate. I am not touching that car, he said plainly, more to himself than anyone else, but loud enough for the circle of onlookers to hear. And the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable, the authority that had once surrounded the guard now thinning, dispersing into uncertainty. And then it happened again. Another notification, sharper this time, longer, and the guard's grip tightened as he read it, his posture straightening. Instinctively, like someone who had just been reminded of a chain of command far above his own position, his eyes flicked up to Naomi, then back down, then up again, as if confirming what he was seeing matched who was standing in front of him. And for the first time since this began, he took a step back instead of forward, creating space where before he had tried to take it. Who exactly are you? The man from earlier asked, his voice no longer confident, now edged with something closer to concern, because the answer to that question suddenly mattered more than anything else in the moment. Naomi let the question sit for a second, not out of hesitation, but because timing mattered, because the truth did not need to be rushed when it was already in motion, and behind her, another phone lifted slightly higher, capturing everything, because people could feel it now, the shift, the turning point, the moment where the story they thought they were watching was no longer the one unfolding. Naomi finally moved her hand slightly, not dramatically, just enough to adjust the phone still resting at her side, and when she spoke, her voice remained calm, unchanged, but now it carried a clarity that cut through everything else. I am the one who signed the transfer, she said, and the simplicity of it made it land even harder, because there was no performance, no explanation layered on top, just a statement that connected directly to the words the guard had just read, and the guard's face changed, not drastically, but enough for everyone watching to see that whatever authority he thought he had in this moment was no longer his to use, and the silence that followed was no longer tense. It was revealing, because the truth had finally arrived, and it was not asking for permission to be believed. The statement did not echo, it did not need to. It settled into the space with a weight that rewrote everything around it. And for a brief moment no one moved because the meaning was still catching up to the moment. The guard blinked once, then again, his mind working through the gap between what he thought he understood and what had just been placed in front of him. You signed the transfer, he repeated, slower this time, as if saying it out loud might make it clearer, might make it smaller, But it did the opposite. It expanded. It filled the silence with something undeniable, and his eyes dropped back to the device in his hand where the updated record remained. No longer just a notification. Now a confirmation, timestamped, verified, complete, ownership reassigned less than 15 minutes ago. Effective immediately, and the realization hit him not all at once, but in pieces, each one heavier than the last. The space he was standing in, the rules he was enforcing, the authority he thought he represented, none of it belonged to him in the way he had assumed. And the tow truck driver let out a low whistle under his breath, stepping fully away from the vehicle now, arms crossing loosely as he shook his head. "I am definitely not part of this," he muttered, more certain of that than anything else. And the couple who had spoken earlier fell completely silent. Their earlier commentary gone, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that they had misread the entire situation from the beginning. Naomi did not react to any of it. She did not shift into triumph, did not raise her voice, did not claim the moment in any outward way. She simply stood there, steady, composed, as if this outcome had been expected all along, because for her, it had, and that contrast between her calm and their unraveling certainty made the moment sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. "There must be some kind of mistake," the man from earlier said, but his voice lacked conviction. It sounded more like a hope than a belief, and the guard shook his head slowly, not looking at him, still focused on the screen. "It is not a mistake," he said, the words quiet, almost reluctant, because admitting it meant letting go of everything he had just tried to enforce, and that was not easy, not in front of an audience, not in a moment like this. Another vibration buzzed through the device, this time accompanied by a tone he had never heard before, sharper, more official, and when he opened it, the message was not a notification, it was an instruction, direct, clear, leaving no room for interpretation. His shoulders straightened automatically, not out of authority, but out of recognition, and when he looked up at Naomi again, it was different now, completely different. The certainty was gone, replaced by something closer to accountability. "Ma'am," he said carefully, choosing the word again, but this time with full awareness of who he was addressing. "I have just received confirmation that your access has been updated to full executive control over this property." And the words, spoken aloud, landed across the small crowd like a final shift in gravity, because now it was not just implied, it was declared. The truth had a voice, and it was not hers, it was his, and that made it real in a way no argument ever could. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, not to challenge, not to dominate, but to acknowledge that he had finally reached the point where the truth could stand on its own. And when she spoke again, her tone did not change, but the weight behind it settled deeper. "Then you understand," she said, and the guard nodded once, slowly, because now he did, not just the words on the screen, but the mistake, the assumption, the entire chain of events that had led to this moment. And for the first time since it began, there was no confusion left, only consequence waiting to be addressed. Understanding did not come with relief. It came with weight, and the guard stood there holding it, his posture no longer rigid but recalibrated, as if he were trying to figure out where he fit in a situation that had already moved beyond him. The device in his hand now felt less like a tool and more like evidence, and he lowered it slowly, not out of dismissal, but because there was nothing left on the screen that could change what had already been confirmed. The tow truck engine idled a few seconds longer before the driver finally reached in and turned it off completely, the low hum fading into silence that felt sharper than the noise ever did, because now there was no distraction left, no movement to hide behind, just the truth standing in plain view. The small crowd had grown quieter too, not because they had lost interest, but because they had gained understanding. The shift had happened, and everyone felt it, even if they could not yet explain it. The man who had spoken earlier took a slow step back, his expression tight, his eyes avoiding Naomi now, as if eye contact might confirm something he was not ready to accept, and the woman beside him folded her arms again. But this time it was not confidence, it was discomfort, the kind that comes when certainty dissolves in real time. Naomi remained exactly where she was, not claiming space, not demanding acknowledgement, just existing within it fully, and that alone redefined everything around her, because the power in the moment did not come from volume or reaction. It came from control, quiet, precise, undeniable. "What would you like us to do?" the guard asked finally, and the question itself marked the complete shift, because minutes ago he had been giving instructions, now he was waiting for them. And the difference between those two positions could not have been clearer. Naomi looked at him for a moment, not assessing him as a problem, but as part of a system that had revealed itself exactly as it was. And when she spoke, her voice remained steady, measured, but now it carried direction. "First," she said, "you cancel the tow request." The guard nodded immediately, already reaching for his radio, his movements quicker now, not rushed, but responsive. "Dispatch, cancel the tow on Unit 3, he said into it, his tone controlled but noticeably different from before. "Repeat, cancel." A short crackle came back confirming the request, and that alone shifted the space again, because what had been set in motion was now being undone in real time. The driver exhaled and leaned back against his truck, fully disengaged now, no longer part of the situation. Naomi continued without raising her voice. "Second, you remove the warning from my vehicle." And the guard hesitated for just half a second, not out of resistance, but out of the realization of what he had done earlier, then stepped forward carefully, peeling the notice from the windshield with deliberate care, as if the way he removed it mattered just as much as the fact that he was doing it. And when he stepped back, he did not hand it to her. He held it at his side, unsure where it belonged now, because it no longer belonged on the car, and it certainly did not belong in this moment. Naomi watched him, not with judgment, but with clarity, because this was not about the paper, it was about the action, the assumption behind it, and the correction that followed. "And third," she said, her tone still even, still controlled, "you remember this moment." The words were not loud, not dramatic, but they carried further than anything else she had said, because they were not instructions about the present, they were about what came after. And the guard met her eyes again, this time without hesitation, and nodded once, slower, more deliberate, because he understood that this was no longer just about a parking space. It was about the way he had seen her before he knew anything about her, and the cost of that assumption now standing clearly in front of him, and around them, the silence held, not empty, but full, because everyone watching had seen it too, the moment where perception had failed, and truth had taken its place without raising its voice. The moment did not end when the warning came off the windshield. It deepened, it stretched, it settled into something that could not be undone with a single correction. And Naomi stood there not as someone who had just proven a point, but as someone who had seen this pattern too many times to mistake it for an isolated incident. The guard stepped back into position, but it was no longer the same position. His stance was different, less rigid, more aware, as if he had been forced to see beyond the uniform he wore and into the responsibility it carried. And the crowd began to shift slightly, not dispersing yet, but repositioning, people exchanging glances that said more than words could, because they had all witnessed the same transformation, the same unraveling of assumption into truth. And for a brief second, the noise of the city seemed to return, distant traffic, footsteps, the hum of everyday life continuing just beyond the edge of this moment. But within it, everything still felt focused, contained, deliberate. Naomi turned her attention briefly to her car, her hand brushing lightly against the door, as if grounding herself in the physical space she had never lost the right to occupy. And that small gesture carried more meaning than any argument ever could, because it was not about reclaiming something. It was about never having lost it in the first place. "I should apologize," the guard said suddenly, the words coming out more direct than expected, not rehearsed, not forced, but real, and the admission shifted the air. Again, because apologies do not come easily in moments like this, not when pride is involved, not when an audience is present, but he said it anyway, and Naomi looked at him, not dismissing it, not amplifying it, just acknowledging it with the same calm she had held from the beginning. "You should understand," she replied, her voice steady, "that this was never about a parking space." And the guard nodded slowly, because now he did. Now he could see the layers beneath the surface, the assumption that had driven his actions, the confidence he had placed in a system he did not question, and the way that system had failed the moment it was tested against reality. And behind them, A young employee who had been watching from a distance stepped forward slightly, hesitant at first, then a little more certain. "I saw the update come through," she said quietly, her voice not loud but clear enough to carry. The ownership changed 10 minutes before this started, and that detail landed differently because it confirmed what Naomi had already known, what the guard had already seen. But now it was spoken from another perspective, another layer of validation that made the truth even harder to ignore. The man from earlier exhaled sharply, shaking his head once as if trying to process how quickly everything had shifted. "So she was never," he started, but did not finish, because the sentence no longer made sense, and that was the point. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze sweeping briefly across the small group, not to call anyone out, not to confront, but to acknowledge that they had all been part of this moment in one way or another, whether through action or silence. And when she spoke again, it was not directed at one person, but at the space itself. "The problem was never what I drove," she said, her voice calm, even, "or where I parked." She paused just long enough for the words to settle. "It was what you assumed before you knew anything at all." And no one interrupted her, because there was nothing to interrupt. The truth did not need defense. It stood on its own, and the guard lowered his gaze briefly, not out of shame alone, but out of recognition, because he could trace the moment back now, step by step, and see exactly where it had gone wrong. And the silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was reflective, because everyone there had been given something to think about, something that would not disappear as quickly as the crowd eventually would. And Naomi, still standing in the same place she had been told she did not belong, did not raise her voice, did not demand acknowledgement. She simply let the moment exist fully, knowing that its impact did not depend on how loudly it was delivered, but on how clearly it was seen. The silence did not break. It evolved, stretching into something heavier, something that demanded acknowledgement rather than reaction, and Naomi could feel it settling into the people around her, not as embarrassment, not as spectacle, but as realization, the kind that lingers long after the moment ends, the kind that does not disappear just because no one speaks it out loud. And she turned her gaze slightly toward the building again, toward the glass and steel that reflected the morning light, as if nothing had happened, as if the structure itself remained untouched by the shift that had just taken place at its entrance. But Naomi knew better, because buildings do not create culture, people do. And what had just unfolded was not about concrete or parking lines. It was about the way power is recognized, or more often, the way it is ignored until it forces itself to be seen. The young employee who had spoken earlier stood a little straighter now, as if saying what she had seen had anchored her in something more certain, and she added quietly, "The system flagged it as priority level access. I have never seen that before," her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and respect. And that detail settled into the space differently, because it was not just about ownership anymore. It was about scale, about authority that extended beyond a single moment or a single decision. And the guard exhaled slowly, running a hand briefly across the back of his neck, a gesture that revealed more than his words ever could. "I should have checked more carefully," he said, not looking for forgiveness, not expecting it, just stating what had become obvious in hindsight. And Naomi let the words sit without interrupting them, because this was not about correcting him again. It was about letting the realization complete itself. And when she finally spoke, her voice remained calm, steady, but now it carried something deeper, something that connected this moment to a much larger pattern. "It would not have changed anything," she said, and the guard looked up, confusion flickering across his face, because that was not the answer he expected. "You did not act on information," she continued, her tone even. "You acted on assumption." And the distinction landed with precision, because it removed the excuse of error and replaced it with accountability. And the man from earlier shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the exit as if considering leaving, but not moving yet, because something in him knew that walking away would not separate him from what he had already been part of. And Naomi took a small step forward, not toward anyone specifically, but into the space that had been contested just minutes before. And that movement carried its own quiet authority, because she was not reclaiming anything. She was simply continuing to exist where she had always had the right to be. "Systems can be updated," she said, her voice measured. "Ownership can change." She paused briefly, letting the words settle. But the way people see you before they know you, that is the part that reveals everything. And no one interrupted her, because there was nothing left to challenge. The truth had already proven itself, and the guard nodded once, slower this time, not out of obligation, but out of understanding, because he could trace the moment back now, not just to the missing plate in the system, but to the first second he saw her and decided what she was not, and the cost of that decision now stood clearly in front of him, not as punishment, but as consequence. And Naomi looked at him one last time, not with judgment, not with anger, but with clarity, because this moment was never about him alone. It was about something larger, something that would repeat itself in different places, with different faces, unless it was seen for what it was. And then she turned slightly toward her car again, her hand resting lightly against the door, not as a gesture of ownership, but as a quiet reminder that she had never needed to prove her place there, not to him, not to anyone. And the space around her shifted once more, not with tension this time, but with recognition, because the story they thought they were watching had ended, and something deeper had taken its place. The moment did not need another announcement, but it received one anyway, not from Naomi, not from anyone trying to prove a point, but from the system itself, the same system that had been used against her minutes ago, now speaking with a clarity no one could interrupt. The guard's device vibrated again, longer this time, the screen lighting up with a notification that was impossible to ignore, and he looked down almost instinctively, as if bracing himself for what it might say, his eyes scanning quickly at first, then slowing, then stopping completely as the meaning settled in, and whatever color had returned to his face drained just slightly again, not from fear, but from the realization that this moment was no longer contained to this parking space. It had moved beyond it. "There is another update," he said quietly, and the words carried across the space even though he did not raise his voice, because everyone was already listening. The young employee leaned in just enough to catch a glimpse of the screen, her expression shifting almost immediately, her eyes widening not in shock, but in recognition of scale. "It is not just this section," she said under her breath, but loud enough for those closest to hear. "It is the entire property." And that was the line that changed everything again, because ownership of a parking space could be dismissed as a detail, ownership of a building could be questioned, but ownership of an entire complex could not be minimized. It could not be explained away. It could only be accepted. And the man from earlier let out a low breath, shaking his head slowly as if trying to reconcile the image he had formed minutes ago with the reality now standing in front of him, and failing completely. The woman beside him said nothing at all now, her earlier confidence gone entirely, replaced by a stillness that spoke louder than anything she had said before. Naomi did not move closer, did not raise her voice, did not claim the moment in any outward way. She simply stood there, allowing the truth to unfold without interference, because it no longer needed her to speak for it. It was speaking for itself. And when she finally did speak, her voice was calm, measured, but now it carried finality. The kind that does not ask for agreement. "I finalized the acquisition before I arrived," she said, her eyes steady, not challenging, not defensive, just clear. "Every asset, every contract, every access point." She paused just long enough for the weight of that to settle, including this. And the simplicity of the statement made it land even harder, because there was no exaggeration, no performance, just fact. And the guard nodded slowly, because now there was nothing left to question. The system had confirmed it, the notifications had reinforced it, and her presence had embodied it, all at once. And he straightened slightly, not out of authority, but out of recognition, because the role he had been playing minutes ago no longer applied, and the role he needed to step into now required something entirely different. "Understood," he said quietly, and the word carried more weight than anything he had said before, because it marked the complete shift from assumption to awareness, from control to accountability. And the tow truck driver opened his door fully now, climbing back into the cab not to continue the job, but to leave it behind, the engine starting again with a low rumble that felt almost like a release, because the tension that had built in the space had finally found its resolution, not through argument, not through force, but through truth, precise, undeniable, and complete. And Naomi stood there for one more moment, Not to linger, not to hold the space, but to let it settle fully, to let everyone present understand exactly what had happened and why it mattered. And then, without urgency, without ceremony, she reached for her car door, the same door she had been told did not belong there, and opened it with the same quiet confidence she had carried from the very beginning, because nothing about her place in that space had ever changed, only their understanding of it had. The car did not speed away. It moved with the same quiet precision that had defined every step Naomi had taken since she arrived, rolling forward just a few feet before coming to a controlled stop again, not because she needed to, but because the moment was not finished, not yet, and inside the vehicle her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her gaze steady through the windshield, as if measuring something beyond the physical space in front of her, because what had just happened was not contained to a single interaction. It was part of a pattern she had learned to recognize long before she had the power to change it, and now that she did not rush past it. She examined it, understood it, and then decided what to do with it. Outside the car, the guard remained where he was, no longer directing traffic, no longer asserting control, just standing in a space that had shifted beneath him. And the young employee lingered nearby, her posture more upright now, as if witnessing. The truth had anchored something inside her that would not easily move again. The rest of the onlookers had begun to disperse slowly, not in a hurry, but with a quiet awareness that they had seen something they would carry with them, something that would surface again the next time they made a quick judgment, the next time they assumed they understood someone before knowing anything about them. Naomi exhaled slowly, a measured breath that did not release tension so much as acknowledge it, and then she reached for her phone again, not urgently, not reactively, but with purpose, her thumb moving across the screen with practiced ease before she lifted it to her ear. "It is done," she said simply, her voice calm, controlled. "But I want a full internal review initiated immediately." She paused, listening, her eyes still forward. Not just the security team, the entire management structure tied to this property. Another pause, shorter this time. "And I want the training protocols reviewed and updated before the end of the week." She lowered the phone slightly, then added, "No exceptions," and ended the call without waiting for confirmation, because she already knew it would happen. That was the difference now. She did not need to argue for change, she could implement it. And that responsibility carried its own weight, because power, when used correctly, does not react to moments like this. It reshapes what allows them to happen in the first place. Outside the car, the guard watched her, not with fear, not even with anxiety, but with something closer to respect, the kind that comes not from being told who someone is, but from seeing it revealed in real time. And when Naomi stepped out of the car again, the movement was deliberate, not because she needed to reassert anything, but because the moment required completion. She closed the door behind her and walked a few steps back into the space where everything had unfolded, her presence no longer questioned, no longer misunderstood, just recognized. "This is not about punishment," she said, her voice steady, directed at no one and everyone at the same time. "It is about correction." The words landed clean, without excess, because they did not need emphasis, they carried their own weight. "What happened here will be reviewed," she continued, "and it will be addressed." She let that settle before adding, "Not because of who I am, but because of what this represents." And that distinction mattered, because it shifted the focus away from her identity and onto the system that had failed. And the guard nodded once, not out of obligation, but because he understood that this was not personal, even though it had felt that way in the moment. It was structural, and structures can be changed when they are exposed clearly enough. Naomi looked at him briefly, not to revisit the mistake, but to acknowledge the role he now played in what came next, because awareness, once gained, carries responsibility. And then she turned slightly, her gaze moving across the space one last time, not as someone leaving, but as someone who had already reshaped what that space meant. And in that quiet, controlled moment, the real impact settled, not loud, not dramatic, but lasting, because what had changed here would not reset overnight. It would carry forward, into policy, into behavior, into every future moment where assumption tried to take the place of understanding. And Naomi Carter, standing exactly where she had been told she did not belong, did not need to say anything else to prove that she always had. The space did not return to normal, not immediately, and not completely, because something had been seen too clearly to be ignored again, and Naomi stood there for a final moment, not as a figure demanding attention, but as a presence that had already reshaped the meaning of everything around her. The morning light still reflecting off the glass above, the same as before, but now it felt different, as if the building itself had been forced to reflect something deeper than its design. The guard remained where he was, no longer uncertain, no longer defensive, just still, absorbing what had unfolded and what it required of him going forward. And the young employee took a small step back, her expression thoughtful, not shaken, but changed, as if she had just witnessed a version of truth she would not forget the next time she saw something that did not sit right. The rest of the people who had gathered were gone now, their footsteps fading into the rhythm of the day, but the impact of what they had witnessed did not leave with them. It stayed, carried in quiet reflection, in small shifts of awareness that would show up later in ways they did not yet realize. Naomi exhaled once more, not out of relief, but out of completion, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm, steady, and final. Power does not announce itself, she said, not looking at anyone in particular, but allowing the words to settle into the space as a whole. It reveals itself when it is tested, and the simplicity of the statement made it resonate deeper, because it was not just about her. It was about the moment, about what had been exposed when assumption met reality and failed. She turned slightly, her posture relaxed, her presence unchanged, and continued, "You did not need to know who I was to treat me with respect." A brief pause, just long enough for the meaning to land. That was the mistake, and no one argued, no one interrupted, because there was nothing left to defend. The truth had already done its work. The guard lowered his head slightly, not out of shame alone, but out of acknowledgement, because he understood now that this moment was not defined by what he had enforced, but by what he had revealed about himself in the process. And Naomi gave a small nod, not as approval, not as dismissal, but as closure, because the lesson had been delivered, not loudly, not aggressively, but completely. And then she turned back toward her car one last time, opening the door with the same quiet confidence that had never left her, settling into the driver's seat as naturally as if nothing had ever been questioned, because for her, nothing had been. The engine started smoothly, a low controlled sound that matched the tone of everything that had just happened, and as she pulled forward, exiting the space without urgency, without hesitation, the parking spot remained behind her, unchanged in form, but transformed in meaning, because it no longer represented exclusivity based on assumption. It represented a moment where truth had stepped in quietly and corrected everything without raising its voice. And as Naomi Carter drove away, the final clarity settled into the space she left behind. Not spoken, not written, but understood by everyone who had been there, that dignity does not come from recognition. It comes from knowing who you are before anyone else decides who you are not. And that was something no system, no title, and no assumption could ever take away.